Mr. Hammer's fist slammed against the wall beside my head. I flinched but didn't move. His face was red, veins bulging on his forehead like twisted ropes. 2 minutes, Ilara, he roared, his spit landing on my cheek. 2 minutes late, and you think that's acceptable? I stood frozen against the cold concrete wall of the factory hallway, my lunch bag pressed against my chest. The smell of his cologne mixed with coffee breath made my stomach turn. I'm sorry, Mr. Hammer. It won't happen again. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. He leaned closer, his expensive watch glinting under the fluorescent lights. One more mistake, he snarled, his finger jabbing toward my face. And you're out. You'll be begging on the street with the rest of the trash. He straightened his tie and walked away, his leather shoes clicking against the floor. I stood there for a full minute, waiting for my hands to stop shaking. I slipped into the break room during lunch, checking over my shoulder. The everyday skeptic, Veronica from accounting, was at the vending machine. I couldn't let her see what I was doing. My homemade sandwich and apple sat in a small brown bag, along with an extra portion I'd packed that morning. I waited until Veronica left, counting to 10 before I grabbed the bag and headed toward the back exit. The alley behind our factory smelled like garbage and rain. Arthur was there like always, sleeping against the brick wall on a flattened cardboard box. His gray beard was unkempt, his coat torn at the sleeves. I placed the food beside him quietly. His eyes opened slowly, and for just a moment something warm passed between us. Not words, not even a smile, just understanding. I turned to leave, already running late to clock back in. That's when I noticed it. Beneath his tattered sleeve, an antique watch gleamed in the afternoon light. The sky opened up without warning. Rain pounded the alley like bullets against metal. I was already 10 minutes into my afternoon shift when I heard the thunder crack. My stomach dropped. Arthur. His cardboard shelter wouldn't survive this. I glanced at the clock on the wall. Mr. Hammer would notice if I left. But I couldn't just sit there. I grabbed my umbrella from my locker and ran. The alley was flooding, water rushing toward Arthur's corner. He was trying to pull his cardboard over his head, but it was already soaked through. I didn't think, just moved. I opened my umbrella over him and used the plastic sheet from my car trunk to cover his entire spot, tucking the edges under the bricks. By the time I finished, I was drenched. Arthur looked up at me, his eyes glistening with something I couldn't name. As I turned to leave, he reached into his coat and placed something small and heavy on the ground where I'd been standing. I was still damp when I got back to my station. My fingers were cold, my shirt sticking to my back. The production line hummed around me, and I worked frantically to catch up. My supervisor walked past twice, shaking his head. During my break, I went back to grab my umbrella from the alley. That's when I saw it. A perfectly smooth stone, jade green and warm to the touch, sitting exactly where I'd been standing earlier. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my palm. Seemed to pulse with something, hope maybe, or gratitude. I slipped it into my pocket just as Veronica appeared behind me. She leaned in close, her voice low and sharp. "That's bad luck, Ilara," she whispered, eyeing the stone. "You're bringing the street into the office. Someone's watching you." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I looked back at the alley, but Arthur was gone. Mr. Hammer's office smelled like leather and expensive cigars. He sat behind his massive desk, fingers drumming on the mahogany surface. "Sit," he commanded without looking up. "Sep." He slid a stack of papers across the desk. "I need these invoices reconciled, sorted, and filed by end of day." My heart sank. There were at least 200 pages. That's impossible, Mr. Hammer. That's a week's worth of work." He finally looked at me, his smile cold. "Then I suggest you get started." I spent the next 8 hours hunched over those papers, my eyes burning, my back aching. I barely made it to the bathroom. By the time I finished, it was past midnight. I stumbled back to my desk to grab my things. That's when I saw it. Crumpled napkin under my desk. I unfolded it carefully. It was a hand-drawn sketch of our factory's logo, detailed and precise. At the bottom, a looping initial. I stared at the sketch for days. The lines weren't random. They formed a pattern over the logo. I traced them with my finger during my lunch break, sitting alone in the break room. Then I saw it. The lines pointed to specific letters in the company name on the wall. Trust. My breath caught. Arthur had left me a message. But why? What did he want me to trust? I folded the napkin and kept it in my pocket, feeling its weight like a promise. That afternoon I went back to the alley during my break. My heart was pounding as I turned the corner. But Arthur wasn't there. His cardboard was gone. His blanket was gone. The corner where he'd slept for months was completely empty, as if he'd never existed at all. I stood there, frozen, feeling a deep, anxious loss settle in my chest. Where did he go? Did I scare him away? I searched every alley, every corner, every spot I thought he might be. 3 days passed, and there was no sign of Arthur. I asked other workers if they'd seen him. No one had. On the 4th day, I approached a street vendor I'd never noticed before, a man selling newspapers near the factory entrance. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shaky. "Have you seen an older man? Gray beard, torn coat." The vendor looked at me like I was crazy. "The old man hasn't been here for days," he said curtly. "Don't worry. They always move on." His words stung, but I turned to leave. Then he called after me. "Hey, he left something." He pointed to the discarded cardboard box in the corner. I walked over, my hands trembling. Taped neatly to the inside flap was a tiny, tarnished antique key. It was cold and heavy in my palm, and I had no idea what it opened. I hid the key in my locker, paranoid that someone would see it. But the secret burned inside me. Finally, I told Veronica. We were alone in the break room, and I pulled the key out, showing it to her. "The old man left this for me," I said. "I think it means something." Veronica burst out laughing. "A key? To what? A dumpster? Get real, Ilara. That old man was probably a thief setting you up." Her words stung, but I didn't argue. I took the key back and studied it that night in my tiny apartment. Under the dim light of my desk lamp, I noticed something I'd missed before. The head of the key had an ornate crest engraved into it. Detailed, expensive, clearly belonging to something old and important. I took a photo of it on my phone and zoomed in. The crest showed a shield with intertwined letters. I'd seen it before, but I couldn't remember where. I stayed late at the factory the next evening, searching through the storage room. There were boxes of old files, company records going back decades. Finally, I found it, a dusty old company history book, leather-bound and forgotten. I flipped through the pages until I found a single, out-of-focus photo. A young man in a suit, standing proudly in front of our factory. On his lapel was the exact same crest from the key. The caption was torn off, leaving only a date, 1982. My hands trembled as I stared at the photo. Who was this man? Suddenly, the storage room door swung open. Mr. Hammer stood there, his face twisted with suspicion. "Looking for secrets, Ilara?" He snatched the book from my hands. "This company has only one owner, and it's not some ghost from the past." He threw the book into a trash bin and pointed at the door. "Get out. Now." The next morning, Mr. Hammer called me into his office again. He slid a small package across the desk. "Deliver this to a special vendor," he said. "Address is on the label." I looked down. The address was in the city's financial district, a high-rise office building. My heart raced. The office number on the label was 538. The same number engraved on the jade stone Arthur had given me. I took the package and left, my hands shaking. When I arrived at the building, the receptionist looked at me strangely. "I'm here to deliver a package," I said. She glanced at the label, then back at me. "You're Ilara." I nodded. She didn't take the package. Instead, she handed me a thick envelope sealed with wax. The crest pressed into the wax was the same one from the key. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single card. Welcome to the annual shareholders meeting. I stood in the lobby of the high-rise, feeling completely out of place. Everyone around me wore expensive suits and designer dresses. I was still in my factory uniform, faded jeans and a work shirt with oil stains. The envelope in my hand felt impossibly heavy. Security guard approached me. "Miss Ilara?" he asked politely. I nodded, unable to speak. He handed me a visitor badge. It had my name printed on it, along with a title, Special Guest. 38th floor, he said, gesturing toward the elevators. My legs felt like jelly as I stepped inside. The elevator climbed, and my reflection stared back at me in the polished doors. Small, scared, out of place. The doors opened, and the first person I saw was Mr. Hammer. He stood in the hallway, staring at me with his mouth hanging open. His face pale with shock and confusion. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Mr. Hammer moved quickly, blocking the conference room entrance. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, grabbing my arm. "How did you get that badge?" I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "I was invited," I said quietly. "Let go of me." He laughed, but it sounded forced. "Invited? You. This is a shareholders' meeting. You don't belong here." Before I could respond, a security guard appeared. Tall, distinguished, and wearing a suit that probably cost more than my rent. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. Mr. Hammer straightened up. "This woman doesn't have clearance." The guard looked at my badge, then at Mr. Hammer. "Miss Ilara is a special guest of the chief shareholder. Please step aside, sir." Mr. Hammer's face went from red to white. The guard gently moved him out of the way and gestured for me to enter. I walked past Mr. Hammer, feeling his eyes burning into my back. The conference room was massive. A long table stretched down the center, surrounded by leather chairs. About 20 people sat around it, all dressed in expensive suits. At the front of the room, a massive screen showed an organizational chart. Not just for our factory, but for the entire conglomerate that owned it. I slipped into an empty seat near the back, trying to make myself invisible. A woman at the front stood up and began speaking. "We're here to discuss the future of the Paramount Manufacturing Division," she said. I recognized our factory's name. My heart pounded. Then I noticed something strange. At the head of the table sat a single enormous chair, draped with a white cloth. The woman gestured toward it. "We are awaiting the arrival of our chief shareholder, the true founder of this company, who insists on a dramatic entrance." She walked over and pulled the cloth away. Sitting on the chair was the antique watch I'd seen on Arthur's wrist. The room fell completely silent. Everyone stared at the watch. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Then a hidden door at the side of the room opened. Arthur walked in. But he wasn't the Arthur I knew. He wore a tailored navy suit, his beard neatly trimmed, his gray hair combed back. He looked powerful, commanding, like someone who owned the world. He walked to the head of the table and picked up the watch, fastening it to his wrist with steady hands. Then he smiled directly at me. "My name is Arthur Bellamy," he said, his voice strong and clear. "I founded this company 43 years ago. For the past 6 months, I have been observing and testing potential leaders." He turned to address the room. "I wanted to find someone with true integrity, someone who would give when they had nothing, someone who would sacrifice comfort for kindness." He walked toward me, and I felt the entire room's eyes follow. "Ilara," he said, extending his hand, "that key you found opens a vault. A vault containing documents proving you are now the majority stakeholder of this company." I couldn't move. My brain refused to process his words. Majority stakeholder. Me. Arthur reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather folder. He placed it on the table in front of me. "Open it," he said gently. My hands shook as I opened the folder. Inside were legal documents, stamped and notarized. My name was printed at the top. Ilara Monroe, primary shareholder, 51% ownership of Paramount Industries. I looked up at Arthur, tears blurring my vision. "Why?" I whispered. He smiled, a warm, fatherly smile. "Because kindness is the rarest form of wealth." Mr. Hammer was my test. A cruel man I allowed to run the factory to see who would remain good despite his cruelty. "You passed, Ilara. Every day you passed." He placed his hand on my shoulder. "This document is dated to take effect 6 months from today. Until then, you must remain silent and continue working. Can you do that?" I nodded, unable to speak. He handed me another envelope. "When the time comes, everything will be ready." The next morning, I walked back into the factory like nothing had changed. Mr. Hammer was waiting by the entrance, arms crossed. "What were you doing at that meeting?" he demanded. I looked him straight in the eye. "Delivering a package like you asked." He studied me, suspicious, but finally nodded. "Get to work." For the next 6 months I endured everything. Mr. Hammer's yelling, his impossible deadlines, his insults. But now every moment of abuse felt different. I wasn't suffering, I was counting down. I used my new knowledge to quietly help my coworkers. I paid off small debts for people who were struggling. I anonymously covered medical bills. I saved every penny I could. And every night I looked at that legal document and reminded myself, soon. The date circled on my calendar grew closer. And 1 week before the 6-month anniversary, Mr. Hammer announced a mandatory early morning meeting. Same place, same time. Same humiliation. The meeting was scheduled for 7 a.m. in the factory's main warehouse, the exact spot where Mr. Hammer had pinned me against the wall 6 months ago. I arrived 5 minutes early, my heart pounding. Workers filed in, confused and tired. Mr. Hammer stood at the front, arms crossed, wearing his most expensive suit. "I called you all here," he began, his voice booming, "because I'm tired of carrying dead weight." He turned and pointed directly at me. "Ilara Monroe has been a burden to this company for years. Lazy. Incompetent." Whispers spread through the crowd. I stood still, my hands folded, waiting. "And today," he continued, "I'm making an example of her. Lara, you're done. Pack your things and get out." The room was silent. No one moved. Then the warehouse doors swung open. A man in a gray suit walked in, carrying a leather briefcase. Mr. Hammer turned. "Who the hell are you?" he barked. The man smiled. "I'm here for Miss Monroe." The lawyer walked directly to me and opened his briefcase. He pulled out the legal documents and handed them to me. My hands were steady now, completely calm. I turned to face Mr. Hammer, who was staring at me with growing confusion. "I'm not resigning," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I'm the new chairman of this company. I bought the holding company 6 months ago." I held up the documents so everyone could see. "My name is Ilara Monroe, and I now own 51% of Paramount Industries." The warehouse erupted. People gasped, shouted, stared. Mr. Hammer's face went from red to white to gray. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I stepped closer. "You told me I'd be begging on the street with the rest of the trash," I said quietly. "But the man you thought was trash was the founder of this company. And he chose me to replace you." Mr. Hammer stumbled backward, gripping the table for support. For the first time in my life, I saw him powerless. Afraid. Veronica stepped forward, her face twisted with disbelief. "This is a prank," she said, looking around. "It has to be." I turned to her, calm and composed. "It's not." I walked over to the time clock on the wall, the same clock where Mr. Hammer had timed my 2-minute lateness 6 months ago. Pointed at it. "You told me one more mistake and I'd be out," I said, looking directly at Mr. Hammer. "Well, your lack of empathy cost you your company. And now you're 2 minutes too late." I nodded to the lawyer. He stepped forward. "Mr. Hammer, effective immediately, your employment is terminated." The words hung in the air like thunder. Mr. Hammer tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Security guards appeared at the door. "Escort Mr. Hammer from the premises," I said. As they led him away, he looked back at me one last time. Broken, defeated, humiliated. Then I turned to Veronica. "But I believe in second chances. You're promoted to supervisor. Don't waste it." 3 weeks later, I sat in Arthur's old seat at the head of the grand conference table. The same table where I'd first learned the truth. In front of me were documents to restructure the company, turning it into an employee-owned cooperative. Arthur sat across from me, smiling proudly. "You're doing the right thing," he said. He nodded. "I want to share this with the people who actually do the work. The people who suffer when leaders forget what kindness means." I stood up and addressed the room full of factory workers. My workers now. 6 months ago, I shared my lunch with a man I thought was homeless, I said. That simple act of kindness led to everything you see today. I held up the jade stone Arthur had given me. The wealth you show the world doesn't matter. The kindness you give when no one is watching is the only investment that returns a billionfold. Remember that. The room erupted in applause. And for the first time in years I felt truly free.